I'm talking to you. We've had reports about this address.
Reports about what?
Suspicious activity. Can you tell me what you're doing here?
I'm at home. This is my house.
All right, then step outside and show me some ID.
You want me to step outside my own home?
Ma'am, don't make this harder than it needs to be.
No, I want to understand why you're treating me like this. Is it because I'm black?
The morning coffee was still steaming when Patricia Martinez heard the heavy footsteps on her porch that would change everything. She had been preparing for a day on the federal bench, unaware that the aggressive knocking at her door would lead to the destruction of 2 police careers and send shockwaves through the justice system. What happened next, captured on body camera footage that would later rack up over 25 million views, would prove that even those who wear the robes of justice are not immune to the ugliest forms of prejudice. Before we reveal the moment these officers realized they picked the wrong house, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story where justice finally wins. Patricia was no ordinary target. At 50 years old, she was a presidential appointee with a spotless decade-long record. She lived quietly in an upscale colonial house, known by her neighbors for her kindness and her modest lifestyle. But at exactly 7:23 a.m., Officers Herman Reeves and Marcus Moran pulled into her driveway, acting on a suspicious person report that never actually existed. Reeves had seen a successful woman of color in athletic wear and, triggered by her comfort in this affluent area, decided to make the most expensive mistake of his life. The morning light filtered through the manicured tree line of the subdivision, casting long, peaceful shadows across the driveway of the colonial house where Patricia Martinez lived. At 50 years old, Patricia had earned her quiet life through decades of relentless service to the federal bench. But as she returned from her morning jog, she was unaware that the very system she upheld was about to be turned against her. She moved with the confident, easy stride of someone who belonged exactly where she was, yet it was this very comfort in such an affluent area that caught the eye of Officer Herman Reeves as he cruised by on routine patrol. To Reeves, the sight of a successful woman of color in athletic wear didn't represent a neighbor. It triggered a deep-seated prejudice that whispered she was an interloper. Instead of continuing his patrol, Reeves slowed his cruiser, his mind already churning with a narrative of suspicion that had no basis in reality. He didn't see a chief federal judge, he saw a target. Reaching for his radio, he contacted his partner, Marcus Moran, and began to weave a web of lies that would ultimately ensnare his own career. He fabricated a story on the fly, claiming he was responding to a report of a suspicious person who didn't belong in the neighborhood, a call that, in truth, had never been placed by any neighbor. By the time Moran called up his backup at exactly 7:23 a.m., the lie was solidified as an official police action. The 2 officers stepped out of their vehicles, their hands resting aggressively on their belts as they marched toward the front door. Inside, Patricia was just beginning her day, the steam still rising from her coffee mug as she reviewed files for an afternoon sentencing. The heavy, rhythmic thud of boots on her porch made her pause, a brief moment of confusion crossing her face before the aggressive knocking began. She smoothed her silk red robe and walked toward the door, expecting a neighbor or perhaps a delivery. As she turned the handle, she had no way of knowing that the 2 men standing on her threshold were about to make the most expensive mistake of their lives. Patricia Martinez pulled the door open, the heavy scent of her morning coffee meeting the crisp air of the porch, only to find herself face to face with the aggressive, braced posture of Officers Reeves and Herman. The transition from the quiet sanctity of her home to the cold interrogation on her doorstep was instantaneous. Officer Reeves didn't lead with a greeting or an explanation. He immediately demanded to know who she was and what she was doing in the house, his voice carrying a sharp edge of unearned authority. Patricia felt the confusion rise, a natural instinct to defend her presence in her own home, but as a judge, her mind moved faster than her emotions. She asked if there was a problem, her voice maintaining a level of composure that clearly irritated the men standing before her. Instead of answering, Moran stepped forward, adding his weight to the intimidation, claiming they had received reports of suspicious activity at this specific address. It was in this moment that Patricia made a calculated, brilliant decision that would define the rest of their lives. She knew the law better than the men trying to weaponize it against her, but she chose to stay silent about her position. She decided to play the role they had cast for her, a woman with no status, no power, and no way to fight back, to see exactly how far they were willing to go. She calmly asked for the specifics of the reported activity, watching as Reeves stammered, unable to provide a single detail because the report was a ghost of his own making. The air grew thick with a tension that only occurs when a lie begins to fray. Thompson, sensing the lack of a legal anchor, doubled down, warning her that she needed to verify her right to be there, and that her very questions were a sign of a suspicious attitude. Patricia remained firm, stating she was simply exercising her constitutional rights, but the mention of the Constitution only seemed to fan the flames of their agitation. The officers had mistaken her calm for weakness, and as Reeves took a predatory step toward the threshold, he was about to cross a line from which there was no returning. The air shifted from tense to predatory as Officer Reeves made his second catastrophic mistake, physically pushing past Patricia Martinez and invading the sanctity of her home without a single shred of legal authority. He claimed a sudden need to check for other occupants, a transparent lie designed to justify a search he had no warrant to perform. Moran followed close behind, their boots thumping heavily on the hardwood floors of a federal judge's private residence. Patricia did not raise her voice or physically resist. Instead, she stood her ground with a chilling clinical calm, clearly stating for the record that they were entering without her consent and in direct violation of the law. She reached for her phone to begin recording the intrusion, but the moment the camera lens caught the light, Reeves exploded with a level of aggression that bordered on the feral. He demanded she stop immediately, and when she refused to yield her constitutional right to document the encounter, he lunged forward, snatching the device from her hands and hollowing out the room with the sound of it hitting the far wall. What the officers failed to realize was that they were walking into a digital trap. 6 months earlier, Patricia had installed a state-of-the-art security system that captured every angle of her living room and kitchen in high definition, with crystal-clear audio that left no room for interpretation. Every illegal step, every drawer they rifled through, and every violation of her rights was being automatically uploaded to a secure cloud server beyond their reach. As they stood in their living room, Moran began demanding she proved she actually lived in the house she had just let them into, his voice dripping with the assumption that a woman like her couldn't possibly be the owner. When Patricia calmly requested their badge numbers and the name of their supervisor, the thin veneer of professional conduct vanished entirely. The racial slurs that poured out of Reeves' mouth next were so vile and hateful that they would eventually cause a future jury to recoil in visible disgust. He and Moran mocked her, suggesting she was involved in drugs or worse, all while the silent, blinking red light of the security camera bore witness to the exact moment their careers began to incinerate. The air in the living room was thick with a toxic mix of arrogance and ignorance as Officers Reeves and Moran continued their unauthorized ransacking of Patricia's personal belongings. For 20 agonizing minutes, the chief judge endured a barrage of vile commentary, listening as they suggested that a woman like her could only afford such a home through illicit means, their language so saturated with hatred it would eventually cause juries to visibly recoil in a court of law. Throughout the ordeal, Patricia remained a statue of professional restraint, never once raising her voice, as she repeatedly and calmly requested their badge numbers and the contact information for their supervisor. The officers, finding absolutely nothing to support their fabricated suspicions, finally prepared to leave, but Reeves couldn't resist one final display of intimidation. He leaned in, his voice a low snarl, and threatened to have her arrested for trespassing if he ever saw her in the neighborhood again, adding that he would contact the real homeowner to report a suspicious intruder. That was the moment the trap snapped shut. Patricia didn't argue. She simply turned and walked with measured steps toward her home office, leaving the officers standing in her living room. When she returned, she wasn't carrying a phone or a camera, but something far more lethal to their careers. She reached out and placed her official federal judicial credentials directly onto the coffee table between them. The silence that followed was deafening. The transformation in the room was physical. The blood drained from Reeves' face until he went completely pale, while Moran began a slow, instinctive retreat toward the front door. They realized in a single heart-stopping instinct that they hadn't just bullied a civilian, they had racially abused and illegally searched the chief judge of the federal district court, a woman who oversaw the very criminal cases they were sworn to protect. Patricia calmly informed them that every felony they had committed was captured in high definition, and that the FBI would be her next call. The silence in the living room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the high-end security system that had just recorded the end of 2 careers. Within 30 minutes of the officers' panicked retreat, Patricia Martinez was on the phone with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, her status as a chief federal judge granting her direct access to agents who specialized in police misconduct. Special Agent Maria Santos, a 20-year veteran, arrived at the colonial home within 2 hours, accompanied by a federal prosecutor who could hardly believe the evidence unfolding on the monitor. They spent the afternoon in Patricia's office, reviewing the crystal-clear 8K footage that captured every illegal entry, every tossed phone, and every vile slur uttered by Reeves and Moran. As the technical specialists secured the cloud-uploaded files, the weight of the federal government began to shift toward the local precinct.
While Patricia calmly provided her statement, the story was already beginning to fracture the foundation of the city's leadership. By the time the local police chief, Robert Martinez, was briefed on the identity of the suspicious person his officers had harassed, the FBI had already launched a comprehensive review of the department's records. Subpoenas were issued for the last 5 years of arrest patterns and internal communications, unearthing the disturbing trend that the department had long ignored. The data revealed that black residents in affluent areas were 17 times more likely to be stopped, a systemic failure that Reeves had exploited 12 times before without consequence. The blue wall of silence that had protected Reeves and Moran for years was being dismantled by a federal grand jury convened in record time. For Patricia, the battle had moved from her living room to the halls of justice, where she would ensure that the violation of her home became the catalyst for a total transformation of the law. The federal trial of Herman Reeves and Marcus Moran became a landmark moment in the history of the regional justice system, drawing national media attention to the very courtroom where Patricia Martinez had presided for a
The federal trial of Herman Reeves and Marcus Moran became a landmark moment in the history of the regional justice system, drawing national media attention to the very courtroom where Patricia Martinez had presided for a decade. The atmosphere was electric as the jury was shown the 8K security footage, the high-definition clarity capturing every micro-expression of contempt on the officers' faces. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as the audio played back the vile racial slurs and the sound of Patricia's phone shattering against the wall. Throughout the proceedings, Patricia sat in the gallery, her presence a silent, powerful reminder that the law was finally looking back at those who had abused it. The defense's attempt to paint the officers as overzealous but well-intentioned collapsed under the weight of the FBI's findings, which detailed a 5-year pattern of systemic profiling and the suppression of 12 prior citizen complaints. When the verdict was read, the gasps in the room were audible. Both men were found guilty of multiple federal civil rights violations, including official misconduct and the deprivation of rights under color of law. The sentencing was even more devastating. The judge, citing the need to restore public trust, sentenced Herman Reeves to 15 years in federal prison and Marcus Moran to 12 years, noting that their actions had not only harmed a fellow jurist, but had poisoned the relationship between the community and the police. Beyond the prison terms, the city was rocked by a $50 million total payout in settlements, and the police department was placed under a permanent federal consent decree. Patricia Martinez didn't just win a case, she dismantled a corrupt culture. She used the $12 million from her personal settlement to establish a legal clinic for victims of profiling, ensuring that her victory wasn't just a moment in history, but a foundation for a future where no one would ever be made to feel like a stranger in their own home again. The echoes of the heavy gavel strike that ended the trial of Herman Reeves and Marcus Moran did not merely signal the end of a criminal case, they announced the beginning of a profound systemic shift. As the two former officers were led away in handcuffs to begin their respective 15 and 12-year sentences, the city they had sworn to protect began the painful process of looking inward. The $50 million in total settlements and the imposition of a federal consent decree served as a stark financial and legal wake-up call, but it was the quiet, steady leadership of Patricia Martinez that ensured the change was permanent. She did not return to her bench to simply resume her old life. Instead, she used the national platform her trauma had created to become the architect of a new era of accountability. With the $12 million from her personal settlement, Patricia established the Martinez Institute for Judicial Equity, a legal powerhouse dedicated to providing high-level representation for victims of police misconduct who lacked her resources and status. The institute became a beacon of hope, staffed by civil rights attorneys who used the same clinical, evidence-based approach Patricia had used in her own living room to dismantle corrupt precincts across the region. Meanwhile, the local police department underwent a total transformation under the watchful eye of federal monitors. The blue wall of silence was replaced by a culture of transparency, where body camera footage was no longer something to be hidden, but a tool for truth. Patricia continued to live in her colonial home, the same red robe occasionally visible as she enjoyed her morning coffee on the porch. She was no longer just a neighbor or a judge, she was a living testament to the fact that while prejudice may be a part of the human condition, it is no match for a person who knows their rights and has the courage to stand their ground. Her legacy wasn't just the prison cells holding 2 corrupt men, but the thousands of residents who could now walk through their own neighborhoods without the shadow of a patrol car suspicion looming over them. Justice, though delayed by a 20-minute intrusion, had finally found its home. This case is a stark reminder that the law applies to everyone equally, but it often takes someone with immense courage to prove it. Do you think this kind of behavior happens more often than we realize? Let me know your thoughts in the comments also. And if you haven't already, subscribe now to join our community of truth seekers. While this story is based on detailed accounts and documented events, please note that certain specific details or dialogue may vary across different reports. However, all information presented here was gathered from a reliable source to ensure the core narrative of accountability remains accurate.